In 1889, Copper King W.A. Clark and 74 other men wrote a state constitution to serve the needs of Montana's powerful interests, with a weak governor, a secretive legislature, and special tax deals for the powerful. After 60 years under the copper collar, Montana was declared the nearest thing to a colony of any American state. The Anaconda Mining Company even owned most Montana newspapers, the Copper Press. The corporate dominance of Montana's political affairs was unique in American history. 70 years after statehood, the Copper Press was finally sold, and thousands of World War II veterans had been educated under the GI Bill. Newly enlightened Montanans wanted out from under the copper collar, and big winds of change roared across the Treasure State. Changing Montana's constitution was the top priority. Strengthening the governorship, opening up the legislature, empowering citizens. Voices of Montana women, totally silenced in 1889, rang out loud and clear for these changes. When the Constitutional Convention began, 19 women were among the elected delegates. And when the delegates came together in convention, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, men and women, young and old, sat alphabetically as equals, Montanans just wanting to make their state better. And so they did, producing a constitution for the ages, the last best constitution. Now, at its 50th anniversary, Evan Barrett and real history makers of the time shine a light on the creation of this remarkable Montana Constitution.
Well, welcome back to Last Best Constitution, our series about the Montana Constitution. We're filming this whole series during the year of the 50th anniversary of the Montana Constitution. In 1972, it was drafted and passed by the people of Montana, and here we are in 2022 having a large celebration of the Constitution and the convention that created this wonderful document. And the mainstays of our series are the remaining living delegates of the Constitutional Convention. We have 100 delegates took part, and they were citizen delegates. Elected officials were not allowed to be delegates to the Constitutional Convention. And so 525 roughly citizens signed up to run for the 100 seats. They ran as independents, they ran as Democrats, they ran as Republicans. They had primary election and a general election. When it was all said and done, there were 100 delegates sitting there in the House chambers, the convention hall, if you will, ready to write a constitution. And of those 100 delegates, citizen delegates, only 10 are still left with us in 2022. And 8 will be at this convention, this celebration, and we're very pleased that we have one of those here with us tonight on the Last Best Constitution, and that's Lynn Sparks Keeley, who was a delegate, one of the younger delegates at the time, and was a delegate from Butte. So, Lynn, welcome to
Thank you,
Last
Evan.
Best Constitution.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Now you look like you have a tan. Where would that be coming from? We haven't seen that much sun up here lately.
You know, I had to bite the bullet and follow my children, and so I live in Mesa, Arizona now. I've been there for the last 9 years. And so I get my son in the swimming pool every day.
Oh, hey, that's the well, it's a chilly day out today. In any case, you came out of Butte, and you were one of the younger delegates, and the Butte delegation, I believe, had 2 women.
Yes.
You and
Veronica O'Sullivan.
Yeah, Bernie Sullivan.
Yes.
Yeah. O'Sullivan, as we like to
Sullivan or Sullivan O'Sullivan.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And she, and then you came from there, but you'd had a little bit of a history before you ran for the Con. Tell us about, you went to University of Montana, did you?
Correct.
And
Correct.
Tell us, and then when you left there, you headed out of the country, didn't you?
No, actually, 10 days after I graduated, I headed to Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's a foreign place.
Yeah, well, it's very foreign, but I had a job in D.C., and so I packed up and went there, and I spent almost 2 years there, and then I went into the State Department Foreign Service, and it was during the time of the Vietnam and overthrow of Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. And so I was assigned to the Dominican Republic Embassy. So I spent about almost 3 years in the embassy in the Dominican Republic during the revolution.
So what was your degree in when we went to?
Well, it was my degree at that point was in sociology with an emphasis on criminology, and then I had a minor in anthropology and languages. I spoke German, Russian, and French.
So you went to the Dominican Republic,
yes,
where you didn't speak Spanish.
We're a Spanish-speaking country, and they said, well, if you know 3, you can learn 4.
Yeah.
Well, we'll give it a try.
Yeah, that's good. Now, when you were in D.C., is there anything you can tell us about what you were in D.C. before you went to the State Department?
Well, if I did, they'd probably come after you and I, so I probably shouldn't tell you what I was really doing.
Oh, this is one of those jobs where they say, if you tell me, we'll both get shot?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That's it. I really don't want this whole audience to know. So.
Okay. Well, that was a very interesting career, and then you came back to Butte?
No, well, I did. I came back when I gave up my tour of duty in Dominican Republic. They wanted me to come back to D.C. and prepare for another post, and I'd had enough of D.C. So I stayed on in the country and worked for a couple gentlemen who were revising the hotels down there after the revolution, and I did public relations work for them for another 1.5 years. And then I came back to Montana, and I informed my parents that I was retiring. And my father said, don't you tell a soul what you're doing. But I did. I took my PERS from the federal and whatever, and I traveled the United States until I ran out of money. Then I came back to Butte and got a job.
Yeah. So tell me, when it came to this, when they announced this constitutional convention, who did you consult with? Who did you talk to? Who urged you to run? How did that all happen to a young woman?
Well, I'd had kind of a taste of the politics in D.C., and it really wasn't anything I really thought I wanted to do. But this sounded so interesting, and it covered some areas. My father was in local politics, and I just felt like that it might be something interesting, and I'd like to give it a try. And I talked to several different people that had been in legislature or whatever, and they told me they felt it would be a really interesting opportunity for the first time trying politics. So I just jumped in and went on campaigning, and fortunately I made it because it was a wonderful experience.
Now, I'm thinking of the men that ran out of Butte. Dan Harrington was a teacher, but you had several lawyers.
Yes.
And Joyce and
Morris Hennessy.
It was Joyce and Dave Holland.
Dave Holland.
And then there was Driscoll, who was an educator.
Yes, that's right, Driscoll.
So you had an interesting group you were with.
It was a very interesting group.
Did you, the reputation of Butte in the legislature is that they hang together and they all figure it out and vote together and everything else. So did the Butte delegation to the CONCON kind of hang together, or were they all pretty much independent of each other?
I think kind of had the expectation when we first came that it would maybe be, together and whatever, but after it settled and we decided to be alphabetically instead of by party, and we talked about certain things, or we'd converse with one of my other fellow delegates to see if what he felt about this for the Butte area and whatever, but we kind of were on our own. We didn't ever have meetings together and discuss what we should do as a group or whatever.
Now, this alphabetical seating, everybody heralds that as being something that was, well, obviously it was unique in Montana, and everyone talks about it as the impact it had in terms of eliminating that partisanship. And can you reflect on that a little bit?
You know, I thought it was wonderful when we did it, but with the state of everything now, it really impresses me of how we did this and how we accomplished what we did by working together. You got to know your fellow delegates personally, you got to know their families, and I feel like it was just a much more, it was easier for us to compromise and to come up with things than it seems to be now.
Yeah, you know, and when Wade Hood made the point in the last thing he did, filmed it before he passed away, that even though several of the delegates decided they would not support it when it was out for a vote, they all 100 signed the Constitution because they all worked on it together. And, and Wade said that when the 100th one signed it, he had tears in his eyes because of it. How did that feel at the culmination? Your reflections on that?
You know, I had heard that there were a few that were not going to sign it, and that it kind of made me sad because I felt like we all had an equal share and an equal part in doing this, and everybody didn't get exactly what they wanted in it, but nothing went in that I didn't feel we couldn't live with and the state couldn't live with. And it made me kind of sad that they went through all this work and all, so when they did all sign it, I felt good for them because I felt like this is important, that they did this and they should be a signer of it. And I don't know how much they supported it, but I never heard of them not supporting it, being against it.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit later about how you, and along with the other delegates, helped to promote the passage of it by the vote of the people, but you had to write it first.
Yes.
And
yes.
And you know, in that vein, you served on the local government committee.
Yes,
is that
I
right?
did. Uh-huh.
But your dad was in local government, you say?
Yes, Dad was a county commissioner. And school board, and so I kind of, you know, grew up with that local part.
Yeah.
So it made the local government committee quite interesting because I had certain ideas of things that maybe needed to be done in the local government, and I thought we ended up doing quite a good job because we gave the local governments some options and some power.
Well, you know, that's what they would call the substantive committee. Then they had a series of administrative committees that did other things. You served on a second committee, didn't you?
Yes, the Public Relations Committee.
Uh-huh.
I guess they took a hold of what I'd done before, I don't know, but that was a very enjoyable committee. It was, we tried to come up with things to make the Constitution and its proceedings friendly to the public, where people could feel like it was okay for them to come and be heard and that they would be heard equally at our hearings and at different meetings. And also to just kind of, it spread that we were just 50 or 100 people of all different walks trying to do something better for the state. And
so they, now in that, the process you followed was, I believe, that to leave any citizen that had a proposal, their proposal would, the door was open, it was accepted and it was registered in and it was given to a committee to consider. So everybody's thoughts in Montana that wanted to contribute it. And they could do by phone. I remember being called off the floor a couple different times because I had a phone call from a constituent in Butte who had something they wanted to express, and we really tried our hardest. I'm not sure, maybe some were missed, but it made it
easier, I think, for them to do it.
Well, you wanted to have we wanted it to be open to the citizenry,
Yes.
and you wanted them to be aware of that. Now, your your experience with local government. For example, did you communicate with folks in the local government of Butte? Did you talk to your dad about the stuff that was coming up?
Well,
And-
unfortunately, my father had passed away just before I was elected. He passed away in April of '72, or in '71. So he had passed away just before. But we had discussed different things in local government. He'd express his frustration with some things sometimes. But we did have meetings, and we met with commissioners or chief executives or whatever from all the different places, and we would bring up some of the ideas that we had and what their feelings were about them. Some were good, some were not so good. You know, it's to me, the Constitution has always been an outline, and so I was under the impression that you didn't maybe need everything so specific in the Constitution, like
The old one.
Yeah, that like saying that you needed, every county needed to have each as elected official. They need to have the official, but some could maybe be not elected, and some didn't agree with that of the current officials. And
Well, you know, did you notice at the time when that ruling came out that said that current elected officials couldn't run? So did that kind of open the door in a way to you, or were
well, I
you
think
going to do it anyway?
I think it did, but it was more of, you know, I was looking at the variety of the size of our communities in Montana, and maybe one of the larger cities needs whatever the number were that were listed in the Constitution as elected. But a smaller community might not need that. And so to have it written in the Constitution, I felt was kind of made it so every county had to have that, even though they didn't really need it.
Yeah. Well, your vision of the Constitution is what constitutional scholars say it's all about, which is to have a framework, you know, and not to
Yes.
get into such specificity that it's a statute or.
Right, and it's an anchor around your neck because you can't move from it.
And one of the things we've had a little bit of over the years is we've had a few things sneak into the Constitution through amendment that probably don't belong there. There's a victims' rights section in there now, and it was hard to argue against it because it was about victim rights.
Rights.
But it's like it's a whole section of its own. It's huge.
Yes, and it doesn't
and-
need to be part of the Constitution. It needs to be part of the law.
But those, by the way, come from the ability of the electorate, the voters, to propose amendments to the Constitution by initiative. That if they think that the legislature, normally amendments go to the legislature.
Right.
They get 100 votes, then they go to the ballot. But a lot of times citizens feel the legislature doesn't feel friendly about and they're just not going to do it. So they go out and sign petitions and get an initiative. That didn't exist under the old Constitution.
No, it didn't.
So that opened a door for things, some really good things.
It did.
But then again, it opened the door for that crazy thing about victims' rights.
That you can get enough people to sign, but it still opened it up, and it gave people, I think, a little more feeling of belonging to their government. Like in the local government, of having an election every 10 years if you want to keep the same local government.
Yeah.
And the same, you know, with the Supreme Court, that having the election yes or no.
Up or down, yeah,
Yes.
instead of automatic. You know, this 10-year thing for the local government is not about do you want to keep the people in the same, it's do you want to keep the structure
the same. Yes.
And that's one key thing you did in that committee you guys put together. You gave that the people a voice.
Yes, and I think that was a very important part of it, is giving them a voice to say yes or no on these issues without having to, work the normal way through legislature to start with and find someone who will do the bill. And
Now, the fact, this sense of participation and openness permeated the whole convention. What was the feel of things there when you all got together? And was there a feeling about, hey, we're here representing the people, and we got to tell us?
I really did feel that. I had observed various legislatures and whatever before, and I kind of expected it to feel like that, but it wasn't. It was a totally different feel. It was from the little ones out in the farm country to the big cities, Billings and whatever, people were all together, and they would communicate and they would socialize together. It wasn't a big division of things. I just felt like from the very beginning this Constitution and this convention was about everybody. And I think that kind of reflected to the people, because they didn't see big arguments going on or hear about, they're deadlocked on this or they can't come up with something for this.
Think about it, 54 days.
That's what I was going to say, 54 days.
Wow.
And we could have had 6 more days, and we gave it back. So that was pretty good.
Yeah. It was what I heard was that they saved 6 days. One was just good administration, and 2, they wanted to hold the leftover money to help promote it, and then the court came in and said, you can't use it.
Right.
Was that a real shock when that happened?
Yes.
Because you were in the promotional side.
Right, and it was a shock because we thought we could get some flyers, brochures, different things out to give more attention to this. And with it being so new, we thought that would make it easier, because from the time it was signed until the ratification in June wasn't a very long time. So it was still in the people's minds.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was kind of hard, and not having, we had wanted some TV spots or whatever to come on and explain to the people or tell them where they could go to a meeting to get the information and have their questions answered.
So there were, I believe, 75 days between the day of the signing and the day of the election. And that's pretty fast.
Very fast.
There was a decision made. I don't know if you were kind of in the room when that was discussed. I mean, you were on the floor, but the discussion about why do it in June as opposed to November? And was a discussion mainly about, let's get this done. If we get on the general, it'll be harder to pass, or too much time, or?
And I think it was that, plus that it was a positive thing on the public's mind. It wasn't a negative thing.
Right.
And if you give it that much longer, there's always people who can make it negative during those extra days. And we felt like people would be more likely to come and vote for it, or vote for or against, just vote, with it being so soon.
Fresh.
Yes.
Fresh in their mind, huh?
Yeah, and I think, of course, the extra measures that were on the ballot was a big draw to have people come out and vote, like the gambling and whatever.
When you're from Butte, it's like, hey, what about that gambling?
Yeah, so I didn't have any problem promoting it in Butte. Let's get out there and do this. But I really feel that somehow everything we did just fell into place, and it was good timing, it was good people. We had good researchers and help. I don't know that it could ever be repeated anywhere.
Yeah, now who was the researcher on local government? Jerry Halloran, huh?
Yep.
No, there was a real smart guy.
Oh, totally, yes. And very easy to work with. And, all of them I thought, oh, here's these smart young kids going to tell us how to do everything. And they were absolutely not. They presented us with whatever we asked for and researched it for us, and that helps a whole lot too, because that gave us the time. And
Jerry was also a great writer because he'd been a newspaper man.
yes.
And so I understood that he also, in addition to doing his duties with your committee, was also the polisher of a lot of the language and stuff like that to make it read right. Very, very terrific guy. That staffing was really interesting, the upfront work they did before you got there. They did research.
Oh, total. It was just, yes, amazing. And I know you could do it without, but again, I don't know that everybody could make that much of a commitment to do all that research and everything before. And they didn't make any decisions for us. They just laid the groundwork and said, this is...
Well, you know, it wasn't like today where you say, go to Google and you Google something up.
No.
In order to get information, you had to really work at it.
You did libraries and
Library and ship me
yes.
something from a New Hampshire library and I'll get something out of it.
Exactly.
And, that was an arduous journey that they had to do. But they provide a lot of valuable information for you to work with.
Yes, and they were wonderful to work with.
Yeah. Well,
and
they're a terrific bunch of researchers, they were. It was a great concept. Now, the research had been done and had shown that the old Constitution, about 20% of it absolutely had to be thrown out.
mm-hmm.
And about a third of it had to be, maybe more than that, maybe 50% of it had to be modified. And there was only maybe a third of it that could be kept as it was. So you really had a task in front of you.
Yes, and you really couldn't just say, okay, take it section by section, okay, this paragraph's good, this is out. You just had to come up with our new sections of the Constitution and basically start from scratch.
Yeah. Now, in the local government area, you provided an option for local government to be a charter government or self-governing or consolidating?
Yes. Consolidating county and city government was an option. And it was interesting. We had one person come to the hearings and felt that it was really not right that we take these people out of the Constitution as being named as has to be in every city, because where else would they find a job? And so that kind of made my point a little bit there, but it was. But so many of the things were hard because change is hard.
I was going to say that if you had a county commission of 3 commissioners for 75 years, and somebody says, you know, you could do it differently, that'll scare you, especially if you're in a...
Well, yeah.
You know how to operate in that scene.
And especially if you're going to join a county and a city together, and you've had a city council and a county commissioners, and now you're going to become one government. That's a little scary, too.
Now, that option is out there. To my only 2 governments have done it since.
I believe so. Silver Bow and Anaconda, Deer Lodge County.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting it would be those 2.
And it's been very efficient, I know, in Butte.
Well, I think it kind of saved Butte's bacon because the bottom fell out of Butte's economy.
Exactly.
And Butte could not keep 2 governments.
No.
The citizens of Butte could not afford to have 2 governments. And it happened to be the smallest geographic county in the state.
Right.
So you weren't spread all over the place. When they tried to talk about a consolidated government in Missoula County, if you were way up in Seeley Lake, you said, whoa, wait a minute now, what am I? I'm out here, way out here, they'll never even know I'm here.
Exactly.
But Butte was very compact, but they ended up doing it, and because they couldn't afford a sheriff's office and a police department.
Nope.
You know,
and 2
for
fire
example.
departments.
Yeah.
And
so that consolidation probably, given the economic circumstances of Butte, probably saved their bacon.
I think so.
You were there at that time when that was happening,
Yes,
right?
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I came right afterwards. I
Okay.
moved there in '79, and they'd already done it just before that. But now, Butte's version of consolidated government seemed to me to be more like a city government because they have 12 commissioners,
Right.
as opposed to the 3 county commissioners. They have 12 in Butte. It seems more like a city commission, and then the Anaconda was more like a county.
So they have a smaller number. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 5.
5? Okay.
Yeah, but those are the 2 consolidated ones.
Right.
And that option's available, though, to everybody.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean everybody has to do it. And I guess that kind of was the point, that you have a little bit of freedom to do what works for your area and your government. It doesn't have to be done just like everybody else's.
Yeah. Now, what is your, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about some of the big items that people always talk about in the Constitution. One is this openness. And one thing Montana has that no other constitution in the United States has, which is a constitutional right of participation. Our Constitution says if you're a citizen, you have the right to participate in your government's decision-making before the decisions are made. And from that has come all these notice of hearings, and you got to know when something's going on, be able to come and appear and speak, and they can't do it behind closed doors. Tell me about that openness and participation as you saw it evolving.
At first, I wasn't opposed to it. I just thought it'll never work. That it just somehow that it won't be followed and whatever. But as it started, and I think in the beginning, people did a lot more of it than they do now. I mean, they know they can still go, and the meetings are open and doors are open, but unless it's a very special topic they're coming up with, they don't always participate. But it seems I see more people participating in local government than there were before, and a more varied group, not just, say, an elderly group that's concerned. At the same meeting, there may be some younger people concerned about the same topic.
Well, the same thing goes here then with the, in terms of that kind of, there's kind of 3 elements of the Bill of Rights that kind of fit together. One is the right of citizens to participate, and one is the right of citizens to know what their government's doing, that they can't do it in secret, and they can't hide the records, and they have to, if you ask them for the information, they have to give it to you.
Yes.
And that type of stuff. I think so that, and the third was privacy.
Privacy,
And,
yes.
And
that sometimes is a fine line between the right to know and the privacy, but I don't think I've seen too many places where that's been abused or invaded, but I do think that everyone has a right to know what's being discussed and going on in the meetings.
well, especially if it isn't involving some privacy right.
Right, if
you
it,
know,
or just one individual, so it isn't a personal type thing.
You know, I think the right of privacy thing says that that privacy overrides. If there's something happening to you in that meeting that needs to be private, that takes precedence over the public's right to know.
Yes.
Unless there's a compelling state interest. So if you'd stolen $10 million from the state government, there might be a compelling state interest for people to know that.
That they should know that, yes.
But it's an interesting dynamic, that the right to know and the right of privacy. And did that get knocked around quite a bit?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that got a lot of discussion. And I don't think it's one, though, that it ended up, I felt like it was a compromise. I think that by the time it was discussed as much as we did, that people could see the rights in it, that it should be this way. It didn't feel like, okay, that went through because we all compromised. It felt like we all kind of really pretty much believed in that.
Yeah. Well, it's not unique to Montana, in terms of the right to know.
No.
But it is a really strong provision.
Yes.
But this participation thing is unique. I think Montanans aren't very, since if you're 50 years old or younger, you don't know what life was like at all before in the old Constitution.
Oh, no.
The doors were closed.
Everything was closed.
Nobody knew what was going on. They might tell you.
On all levels, from school board to local government to your state to whatever, doors were closed. You didn't know what was happening.
Yeah. So this is, I guess, good government.
Well, I feel it is. And, I live in a community in Mesa, and we have a lot of people from Minnesota and all over. And so some of my friends had heard I was coming for this. And so they wanted to know what it was. So I was trying to explain to them, and they said, well, like, what do you have in your Constitution? So I was telling them about the right to know, and I was also telling them about our right to a clean and healthy environment.
Right.
And they looked at me and said, really? You have that in the Constitution? I said, yes. And they said, this was written 50 years ago? I said, yes. And they're like, wow, that was way forward thinking. So people when they realize now, I think I realize more now what we did and appreciate it more than I did at the time we did it. To see that it's still there in 50 years and that we had on our minds the issues that are pertinent today, back then, 50 years ago.
The clean and healthful environment is the hallmark of the Montana Constitution as well.
Yes.
I'm always taken with what the late, great Wade DeHood said. And someone said, well, what about that clean and healthful environment? And he said, well, wouldn't anyone want a clean and healthful environment?
Exactly.
What citizen would not want a clean and healthful environment? Yeah. And yet it was debated rather extensively.
A long time it was. And that was another one that took some swaying and whatever, but when you kind of think of it, it was a very important part of that document.
I think it's in there twice, by the way.
Is it?
It's in the natural resource section.
Oh, okay.
But it's also in the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
And it's been made into a predominant right. So it's got a lot of strength behind it. But you guys took 7 or 8 votes on it one day. Mm-hmm. The whole day was vote after discussion and vote and more discussion.
Yep.
And
we, there were nights we worked late because we didn't want to carry things over. It was going on, cutting off good discussion is really hard, and adjourning and saying, okay, we'll come and pick it up tomorrow. Yeah. You can't do that. And nobody ever complained or worried about the timeline or what we were doing or that we missed dinner or whatever. We were there for a purpose, and we wanted to get it done.
Now, getting that process moving smoothly would involve who had the gavel.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about Leo Graybill's leadership as you saw it as a delegate.
I overall found he was excellent. There were at times I thought he was a little, I don't want to say overbearing, but a little harsh or whatever. Yeah. But then I'd sit back and realize, well, someone has to control or we'll have a circus. And he was fair to everyone. He let everyone speak. He didn't, I feel, once in a while he kind of sort of had his opinion more out on the open from the podium, but he'd correct himself and not do it. And I felt, for the most part, he kept it very well under control, and also the fairness in all the officers and committee chairmen. They were divided equally between whether it was Democrat, Republican, Independent, and didn't we have New Reform?
Well, New Reform ran, but none of them made it.
None of them made it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, they had some New Reform. That was mostly out of Missoula.
Yes, that's right.
Thing,
yeah.
And the The count actually was out of 58 Democrats, 6 independents, and 36 Republicans.
Yeah.
So it was a real strong majority for the Democrats, and who then said, let's share power.
Yes.
Oh, what an enlightened thing to do.
It really was.
Did it surprise people when it came out
Yes,
there?
very much.
Yeah.
Very much it did, because it was just expected to run like legislature and whatever, and there'd be the Republican caucus and the Democrat caucus, and okay, how are we going to get this through and how are we going to get that? But we all kind of really wanted the same thing, which was a new constitution.
Yeah.
And
now, when we got 100 people to sign it, and we then had 75 days, and you were on the committee that was most involved, and now it took a while before you lost the money.
oh yeah, we didn't know until the end that we had lost the money.
But you couldn't spend it in the meantime.
No.
Now, my recollection, I've been told that Jim Felt, a former Speaker of the House Republican out of Billings, that he knew of a committee in Billings that had about 10 grand that they would, he thought they could flip over and use for the Constitution. Do you recall that?
I do recall hearing about that, and I guess I just kind of assumed that did happen, and they used it for part of the PR. But we had planned on the other money, and we had grand plans for, putting up different informational brochures and TV time, and so we just kind of tried to work with each delegate and giving them ideas on how to promote to their counties, how to hold meetings, or whichever way they were comfortable with to do this. But that really was probably the most important part of the Constitution.
Now, part of that promotion was this.
Oh, yes. George Harper, praise the Lord and pass the Constitution.
Praise the Lord and pass the Constitution, yeah.
Yes.
Tell me about this.
It was, when it first came out, it was sort of like, well, that's a good joke, George. But then it just kind of went, and it felt like that's what this was.
Yeah. And he was a minister.
Yes.
He was a minister from Helena.
Correct.
And so it kind of fit.
It did fit. I'm not sure it would have been as appropriate if someone else had done it, but from George, it really did fit.
But everybody kind of grabbed it then, didn't they?
They did, totally. And every place it went, it was, it just went with the Constitution.
Great bumper sticker.
Yes.
Now,
I wish I had one of them.
Yeah. It's and that was a really interesting thing. Now, mostly it was grassroots campaigning. Like, did you just go to meetings in Butte, or people have meetings like the Kiwanis and stuff to talk about it?
People would invite us to go speak. At one point there were several Republicans running out of Butte and several independents, and different groups would invite a mixture of whatever to go speak to their meetings. When I was campaigning, when it was time for the promotion, several of us would get together and plan a community meeting somewhere that the community would come, and we could each present our views on how the Constitution came about and why it was a good thing. So it was just kind of done. It wasn't a set thing for every county, but I think the delegates of each county kind of decided how to promote this.
Well, they knew their own area, so I guess.
Yes, and it was like, you'd go to gatherings and pass out the flyers on it. I know the League of Women Voters and a lot were very involved in helping support it and encouraging when you voted to vote, for or against the Constitution, but to vote. So.
Now, tell me about your reaction to the fact that in the 1971 legislature, there were 2 women out of 156 legislators not out of 100, but out of 156. There was Dorothy Bradley was on the House side, and Tony Roselle was on the Senate side. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, we wake up after the election, and there's 19 women in the Constitutional Convention, yes. 19%. Tell me about, how did that hit people, and how did it hit you?
Well, first of all, it hit me because I was one of them, and I'm like, oh my God, I really did make this, and I did do this. And then when I saw the list and all these women from all over the state, I guess it made me feel a little more empowered, mm-hmm. and that, yes, we have a little more to say, and we're going to have equal input. And we did. It was, and they were from so many different walks of life, the women. Yeah. There were, but they were all very dynamic. They were very educated. They knew what they were talking about, and they knew their areas. So I think it was a giant step forward, way beyond the rest of the country, to have 19 out of 100.
Well, it actually was kind of like crossing through a threshold.
Yes.
Montana was never the same when it came to women in elected office after the Constitutional Convention.
Mm-mm. Well, we started with Jeanette Rankin, so we ended up with 19 in the
yeah.
Yes. No, it wasn't the same. And women, I think it made them feel better that they can go do this. If they want to run for office, they can do this.
Well, one of my friends who's a male, and I always remind folks that when the first Constitution was passed in 1889, it had to be voted on by the people, and it was voted on by all men.
Men. Mm-hmm.
Because women couldn't vote even back then, and so when it came time to passing this Constitution, I've been told by some enlightened friends that they thought, some other fellow delegates who said, it was the 19 women that had a plan in mind on how to promote it. It was the 19 women who were way ahead of the curve while us men were arguing about all this kind of stuff. They'd already laid out a plan about what to do. You were part of that, weren't you?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. It was, the 19 women just became a very friendly, happy group. And we appreciated each other and each other's input, and we really felt like, okay, we're stronger than it's ever been anywhere. We can do this.
It's clearly you guys made a difference, and do you really reflect upon that the role you played? That do you ever think about how cutting edge you were at the time?
I didn't at the time, but more and more as the years go on, I do. I kind of look back and I think, I can't believe I did that. And I can't believe that there were 19 of us that could be elected and would do that, and that we actually had a part in the decisions being made. And it is, as society moves on, it becomes more and more important that more people feel like it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. You need to get involved if you want to see change and you want to see things happen.
So you saw the fruits of your labors in a way.
Totally.
But it seemed to me that there are still forces around that would like to have women play less of a role in government and less of a role in their own lives. Have you thought about that?
There are, but I think that because what women are doing now and are realizing they can do, I think it would be a horrible force to try and stop. I think that it's on a roll, and I really think that women now have the confidence and feel that if maybe they don't complete it, but they can try.
Yeah, but you were a pioneer then, really, when you think about that. That's pretty amazing. So what other elements in the Constitution stuck out in your mind? Were there things in the like the structure of the executive branch, or how about education? Did you?
You know, I don't recall anything in particular about the education one. I do recall that I was very appreciative of those that were on the education and came up with the plans for them, but I don't think of anything
One
particular.
of the things that came up on education, because you'd come out of the University of Montana, a number of years before at the university, there'd been an economics professor had written a book that exposed that the fact that the Anaconda Company didn't have to pay taxes.
Yes.
And a lot of large ranches and farms didn't have to either. And as soon as he wrote that book, he got fired from his position at the university. Now he was later, there's Louis Levine was his name.
Right.
And he was restored, but he left within a year. He said, I'm not living under this system. And so you guys gave control of the university system. You took it out of the political arena. So you made education a little more independent from politics.
That's true. Yep. I'd forgotten about that, but we did, and that was a very important thing to do, because politics kind of was playing too big a role in the education system, I think. But I remember that happening now.
There are people who don't like that either.
No, but I think that anytime you give all the power to just a few is bad.
Yeah.
And you just need to make sure that at least people have a way of input or to work toward getting the power themselves for.
You know, the agendas when political agendas come into play, they don't really belong in education.
No.
But this right now, you were constraining the legislature from trying to impose, or a governor from trying to impose, and in this last legislative session, I think something like 7 of the bills that were passed by the legislature are under challenge in the courts now for trying to constrain the university system. So there are people who want to get their way with the university system, and your Constitution is getting in the way of that.
Getting in the way, yes.
You should take a perverse delight in that.
Yes, and is that the one that went to the Supreme Court?
Several have been there already, and they'll all end up there eventually.
Right.
But yes, there are a lot of them, from all kinds of things. They wanted to say, well, you couldn't have students register other students to vote on the campus.
Oh yes.
It's like what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a bill that happened again, just this year, or one that said the regions did not have the right to say that you couldn't have guns on campus, and they say you can't carry guns on a campus, which is kind of a common sense thing, it seems to me.
Well, yeah.
Young people who might have a drink or two and have a gun, who knows,
They don't mix.
Yeah, but that's one of those that was passed this session, is still in the courts. So there are people who want to, there's an effort to erode some of the things that are in the documents.
In the Constitution.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, interestingly, I want to ask you this. You may not have ever thought of it before, but the passage of the Constitution was mostly rural-urban. Most of the rural counties voted against it, and every urban county voted in favor of it except for one, which was Butte. Mm-hmm. It was the only urban county that voted against it.
The whole document, yes.
Yeah.
But voted for the gambling.
Right.
Yes.
Now, that was a goofy vote, because if you wanted gambling, you had to have a new Constitution.
Exactly.
So you had to pass the Constitution to have gambling. They all went and voted for gambling and then voted against the Constitution. But it passed. But I wondered if there was any relationship of the fact that Butte was the home of the Anaconda Company, and in terms of their opposition to it, when it came to the election, did you?
You know, I didn't really feel any of that, and I didn't feel even in '72 that the Anaconda Company was that powerful then as it had been in the past.
Well, they were starting to slide, yes.
Yes, and so I guess I wouldn't have thought of it as being a big force in being against it, but I can see where some of them would have been. But I knew some people very well in the Anaconda Company, and they were very much in support of the Constitution. No, they weren't happy with some of the things the way they went, but they were very much in support of the whole document. So I don't know what would be the...
It's one of those great mysteries because it's like 65% of the people voted to have a convention, and then when it passed by 2,500 votes. So there was quite an erosion
in there.
And where did it come? But it was mostly rural. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a change thing.
You know, I could be, or not really understanding. I mean, nobody really understood the original Constitution. And then this one, they were being informed of what was in it, and maybe they didn't understand what they were being. You know, it was like, well, why do I need that? Everything's been fine for 100 years.
Yeah, well, there's an ironclad rule of politics that is that it's easier to defeat something than it is to pass it.
To pass it.
You know, so you guys had your hands full. I was told that Betty Babcock donated an office at the Colonial for you guys to operate out of. You did a little Butte stuff. Did you still kind of hang around Helena a bit and do some work here?
Yes, after the Constitution, I stayed in Helena, and I actually went to work at the Labor Department. And I was in a division. They were equal employment opportunity and trying to start apprentice programs for women getting into the heavy equipment programs.
Hey, that's really cool.
It was very interesting. I enjoyed that a lot.
I want to ask you one more thing, because you have a reputation. You have a reputation which came out humorously at the end of the convention. It said, Lynn never got up and talked about anything. And then they would tease you about it at the end. So tell me a little bit about that, because you told me already what what that was about.
Well, I'm sort of, I guess, a very kind of to-the-point person, and I don't see, you know, beating something to death. So I always felt that on issues, if my point of view had not been presented, either for or against, I would have spoken out. But it was always presented by someone, and I didn't see the need to stand up and say, I agree with the previous speaker or whatever. So I voted my voice every time I pushed the red or the green button, and I did say my pieces in the committees. So.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting that you would, you know, find a way. I think maybe if we saw in Congress, for example, more people adhering to your rule of thumb, which is, hey, I've already heard it, you don't need to hear from me again.
Yes.
So many of these people like, show me the camera, I want to get up and pray.
Yep.
I want to talk. So you found you had a group of delegates around you that pretty well got everything out there in the open on the floor?
I did,
Yeah.
yes. And it didn't matter from which side it came from. My points of view were always expressed at some point.
And did they kind of tease you at the end?
Oh, did they? Yes. The last day, I don't know how many people stood up with the microphone and asked Delegate Sparks to yield. And I would pick up my microphone and stand up and just shake my head.
Oh, that was,
so they never did get my name in any of the proceedings.
But in the committee. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for coming here, coming up from ASA, coming us here for the celebration, joining us here. It's been a great addition to our effort to highlight the Montana Constitution in Last Best Constitution. So we'll look to see you folks on the next episode. Good night.